What is good, everybody? Welcome to another Gold Standard podcast. I'm Rob Stats Guerrera. It's Friday. Michelle Magdziuk is here. Happy Friday, Michelle.
Happy Friday. Cheers, y'all. I have a
Oh,
mimosa. So I went with
yeah.
Mimosa Michelle as my name today.
There you go. I
I'm
love it. It's been a few weeks.
I'm ready to go. I've
All
had a
right.
stressful week, ready to have my weekend and enjoy it.
There we go. I'm glad you have the mimosa. I think that you'll find when Michelle has the mimosa, the show gets better as we go along for some reason. I'm just not saying why, but I just noticed that.
Sometimes I get a little bit more critical of the players, or especially Kyle Shanahan. So we'll see where that goes.
Well, you're joining Grant Cohn because he seems to be on a mission right now to get Kyle Shanahan fired. So,
Okay, well, I'm not there, at least.
okay.
I would like him to still be the coach. I just want him to be less stubborn. That's all.
Okay. Before we get started, I want to remind everybody, please rate, review, and follow the Gold Standard Podcast Network. If you leave a review, we will read it on the show. Help us get our star rating up. 5-star reviews are always appreciated. This one comes from GF Eater. 5 stars, the best. Rob and Michelle are the best. Love their analysis and banter, fun and informative. So we're the best. Enjoy that.
We are the best. And I love our banter too.
I do enjoy it, and I'm so glad that I'm able to be back with you. Last week, Levin filled in for me, and I loved your chemistry together, but, you know, I'm always going to favor myself in these comparisons.
Oh, yeah. I missed you, but I did. I was like, wow, I feel like Levin and I clicked more than I thought we would.
There you go.
It was good.
You wouldn't know it to speak to him or look at him, but turns out Levin knows how to do a good show.
He's a pretty good host.
On today's show, we are going to start our fantasy football preview. Today's show is going to be all about the 49ers specifically. We're going to go through quarterbacks, running backs, receivers, tight ends. I'm not going to make you do kickers or defense because I know you hate those, Michelle.
Thank goodness. Thank you. Because I was not prepared for defense and kicker.
Even though kicker is going to be a thing for 49er fans this year, we don't have to get into it. And then for the next few weeks after this, Michelle is going to do top 10s at all those positions also throughout the entire NFL. So you will be fully prepared for your fantasy drafts by the time 49ers training camp kicks off. So I'm just going to lean on you basically for like the next month.
That sounds great. But I want everyone to remember I had Cortland Sutton as a top 10 fantasy wide receiver last year. So listen to, the context I have to say about these players, but don't live and die by my rankings because I can be wrong.
Don't say we're going to do all your fantasy advice and then say, but don't pay attention to any of it.
No, pay attention to, I will give context around everything. I think that's the important thing. The rankings, on the other hand, aren't like, just because I have Cortland Sutton, like last year, or let's say this year I have Tyreek Hill, one spot of Stephon Diggs. It doesn't mean that's the way you got to go, right?
Okay. Well, yeah, use your own discretion.
Yeah.
By the way, I know this bothers you. I have ordered my fantasy football magazine. It is on the way. I can't wait for it to arrive. Can't wait to crack it open, sit down with my highlighter and start going through it all.
They're going to have Jahmyr Gibbs at like running back 30, and he's going to be at like running back 8 by the time you draft in September. But that's fun. That's fun for you.
It is fun for me. Leave me alone. Let me have.
Oh, you need to tell me where Alexander Madison is, where you get it. I want to know if they fixed it or not.
All right. I will tell you when it arrives.
Dalvin Cook released now. Alexander Madison should be, top 20 at the very least, probably top 15. But if he's all the way down there at like 40, they didn't even edit it from that.
All right. Are you done poo-pooing on my fun?
Yeah.
Can we start the rankings, please?
Yeah, let's do it. I need to take a sip of my mimosa.
There you go. There you go. Let's start with the quarterback because this is obviously the biggest question for the 49ers and it impacts every other skill player on the roster, obviously. How do you approach the 49ers quarterbacks when it comes to fantasy? Is it just an avoid at all cost situation? Because, Brock Purdy down the stretch last year was putting up 2 touchdowns a game.
Yeah, he was a solid enough quarterback. Like if you picked him up off waivers and you were struggling with the Aaron Rodgers or, just the Justin Herbert who couldn't score, if you picked him up, you were pretty happy. So when I did my projections for the 49ers, I did just project it with Brock Purdy because right now it seems like he's going to be back early in the season, even if it's not week 1. It seems like it's going to be pretty soon after week 1. So instead of messing around and being like, well, this one game is going to be with Trey Lance, like I just did the full 17 games with Brock Purdy. And I have him having a pretty solid season. I have him with nearly 4,200 passing yards, just under 29 passing touchdowns, 10 interceptions, and 3 rushing touchdowns. However, with those numbers, that would project him to 279 fantasy points, which makes him from last year, if you compare it to last year, he would have been the quarterback 13 overall with that amount of points. That's not really the spot. It's not really a quarterback you want to draft, right? He can be a fine waiver guy to pick up, but that would have put him right around Justin Herbert and Aaron Rodgers last year. No one enjoyed playing those guys. I had Herbert in many leagues. It was not fun playing him because he never freaking scored any points. So I think he's a fine fantasy quarterback to, grab off waivers at times during the year when he has nice matchups, but he's not someone I'm going to be looking to draft in my fantasy drafts.
The 49ers, like you kind of casually threw out there, 4,000 yards passing. The 49ers have not had a 4,000-yard passer in a really, really, really long time. I believe since Jeff Garcia was the quarterback. So like we can just kind of toss that out there, but like we have not had that from San Francisco.
I think it's mostly comes down to health though, right? Like if Jimmy played the whole year last year or if Brock played the whole year, they would have likely gotten over that 4,000 hump. Not a ton over it, but I do think if Brock Purdy would have played the whole year, what was his passing yards per game average? I should know that, but
it wasn't much. I think it was below 200 or right around 200
because for his starts.
Yeah,
no way.
I'm telling you,
they didn't pass as often as I thought. So I looked like they were only in his 5 starts. They're only like on a pace for 477 pass attempts on the season with that pace. So they did not let him pass very often.
His high was 284. And that's when against the Raiders in that game where they had to keep throwing and scoring the 37-30.
He had 332 in the playoffs against Seattle. So his 17 game projection would have put him at 3,700 passing yards for his 5 starts just in the regular season. Yeah. So I'm projecting him to get a little bit better this upcoming year, then pass a little bit more than they did, because in those 5 starts in the regular season, 21 attempts, 26, 22, and 20, he only had 1 game with over 30 pass attempts. That was against the Raiders when they randomly were scoring nonstop. That was a weird game.
Do you think he'll keep up the touchdowns? Because that was the one thing with Brock. He was throwing at least 2 touchdowns every game.
Yeah, I don't have him like he was on a pace for 37 touchdowns if he were to play a whole season. I don't have him going that crazy. I think that pass touchdown percentage will go down a little bit. That's why I have him around 20. And I could see him getting to 32. Like I wouldn't be shocked, but I could also see him throwing 22. So I kind of have him in the middle there where I think 29 is a nice spot. It's not like Deebo Samuel is this big receiving touchdown guy. Brandon Ayuk's kind of there in the middle. George Kittle had a really good receiving touchdown year with Brock last year, but he doesn't have a ton of guys where you're like, and I just think they're going to use Christian McCaffrey so much around the goal line. He's not going to be putting up close to 40 passing touchdowns.
Lee Ving says in 2 quarterback leagues, Brock was gold at the end of the season. Yeah. That's true. In a 2 quarterback league, if Brock is your number 2, I feel like you're in a good spot.
Oh, 100%. Like I said, like if the points I'm projecting him to have would have put him at quarterback 13 last year, that's at the top of the second quarterbacks, right? If everyone has 2 quarterbacks, then you have one of the best quarterback 2 that you can have. So if you're in a 2 quarterback league, I do think Brock could be a really great value as well, because we don't know how healthy he'll be. We don't even know if he's going to start week 1 or what. So he could end up being a great value.
I don't get the 2 quarterback league thing. Like, what is the point?
It's really big in dynasty leagues. Like I play all my dynasty leagues. It's mostly super flex. So it doesn't have to be 2 quarterbacks, but you want to play 2 quarterbacks because you can play a quarterback in one of your flex spots. But it's big in dynasty. I actually don't play any redraft with 2 quarterbacks.
I know that you said you just figured Brock for the whole 17 games for the purposes of simplicity. Mm-hmm. But how much would your projections for the rest of the team change if it was Lance or Darnold at quarterback? Or do you think that because of Kyle's system, it doesn't really matter that much?
Well, if it was Sam Darnold, then I would have, like, I have Ayuk scoring 7 receiving touchdowns, so which I do think is a little pessimistic. I think he could score more than that. And I have Kittle getting double-digit touchdowns again at 10. If Sam Darnold's the starter, those go down. Like, I'm not projecting those numbers. And also maybe even with Trey Lance, if he's the starter for long, like, I don't think he'd be passing a ton of touchdowns. So this really does come down to Brock Purdy. It wouldn't change really anything for me with Christian McCaffrey, except maybe his rush attempts increase if Trey Lance is in the game. His receptions maybe would go a little bit down. But Christian McCaffrey is the focal point of this offense, no matter who the quarterback is.
All right, well, then let's get to the running backs. We'll start with Christian McCaffrey, but the Niners are, they love to run the ball. They have multiple guys that can do the job, but we'll start with Christian McCaffrey. I would assume of all this bunch of 49ers that he is the one guy you would get if you could get anybody.
Yeah, of course. I mean, he's going to be a top 2 pick, probably top 1 for in many fantasy drafts. He's going to go right at the top there. I have him projected for a very nice season, almost over 1,800 scrimmage yards, 15 scrimmage touchdowns. I have him with the bulk of the carries here for the 49ers at 260 and 11 rushing touchdowns with 90 targets, 626 receiving yards, and 4 receiving touchdowns. So I clearly envision him to be the workhorse for this team and to be the focal point. Now, that comes out to 322 PPR points. That would have actually put him at running back 4 this season. If you just look at those points, it would have put him right behind Austin Eckler himself, because he scored more than that last year, and Josh Jacobs. But it was a huge chunk ahead of the next guys. It was a huge chunk more than Derrick Henry and Saquon Barkley, who were at running back 4 and 5. So it still would have put him in that elite tier. By the end of it, when I have all my projections done, CMC will be my running back 1 or 2. I keep going back and forth between him and Bijan Robinson. I cannot decide. But I think Bijan's that shiny new guy in the league that I'm getting excited about. But I think Christian McCaffrey, besides health, is the safest guy to take. I mean, if he's on the field playing, he's going to score a lot of fantasy points. That's it.
He totally transformed the offense last year. Mina Kimes was just talking about this on her podcast with Field Yates, where I think they were rating all the top offenses, and Mina had the Niners offense at number 5 overall. She was tweeting out some of the numbers after they got Christian McCaffrey. Well, before they got Christian McCaffrey, the Niners were 21st in DVOA, 19th in EPA per play, and 26th in QBR. After they got Christian McCaffrey, they were 1st in DVOA, 1st in EPA per play, and 2nd in QBR. That is the effect that he has had on this team. I don't know if they'll be that good next year because defenses will have had time to adjust and stuff like that. But at the same time, Christian McCaffrey will have had time to learn the system, which he was kind of doing on the fly last year. So I don't know how much to adjust that.
It's also hard because Brock Purdy came in, right? So we don't know how much of it came down. Christian McCaffrey definitely changed this offense. Don't get me wrong. Like, Elijah Mitchell couldn't stay healthy. And going from Jeff Wilson to Christian McCaffrey as your main guy in your offense, like, that's going to make a huge, huge difference. And then not depending on Deebo Samuel too, with these carries, and defenses totally knew what was happening. Like, he did open up things for everybody. So I'm definitely putting that on that. And I do think Brock Purdy was so successful because he had a guy like Christian McCaffrey as a weapon. I think I don't see why this would change in this offense. They have all the same weapons. It really does come down to the quarterback. And Alberto Soto, one of the comments we got, he said, why would the touchdowns go down with Sam Darnold as quarterback? So Sam Darnold in his career has a 3.5 pass touchdown percent. So amount of touchdowns you throw in your pass attempts, 3.5. That is second worst among 24 quarterbacks that have 1,500 pass attempts since 2018, since he joined the league. Only Daniel Jones has a worse percent. And it's Daniel Jones at 3.4, Sam Darnold at 3.5. The next worst is Andy Dalton at 4.2. That is a huge jump from 3.5. So those are the worst 3. And then Derek Carr is sitting there also at 4.2.
Want to know what's funny about that?
What?
The quarterbacks that Kyle Shanahan reportedly wanted were Sam Darnold and Andy Dalton.
I mean, like, I understand his numbers would probably increase with Kyle Shanahan, but I can't. I mean, Sam Darnold's been so incredibly bad. You can't just be like, oh, these players will be fine with him just because of Kyle Shanahan. Like, we've seen some quarterbacks not be good under Kyle Shanahan. I don't know why we're acting like every single one that's played under him has been amazing.
And also, like, if you're going to say that Shanahan is worth like a 15 or 20% boost, whatever you want to put it at, mimosa alert, why not get a quarterback who's already good? So when he gets that boost, he goes from good to great instead of going from trash bag to league average. So, yes, leaving. A nice way of saying Darnold sucks for fantasy. He sucks for fantasy. He sucks for real life. Turns out he's just not any good. Imagine that. Here's the thing with the 49ers, though. Behind Christian McCaffrey, it's interesting. You mentioned Elijah Mitchell. When he's on the field, he's awesome. He averaged over 6 yards a carry last year. The problem is he can never, ever stay on the field. I don't even know if Elijah Mitchell is going to make the team, honestly, because Jordan Mason is there, and Jordan Mason was really, really good in a limited time he played. And the Niners are good at finding these undrafted guys. They still have Ty Davis-Price. I don't know if they remember they still have Ty Davis-Price. What do you think when you look at the running backs behind Christian McCaffrey?
I don't care. I'm not going to draft any of them. I mean, they would be handcuffs, right? If Christian McCaffrey were to go down to injury, then like you said, Elijah Mitchell could possibly not make this team. It's not due to talent. I mean, he's clearly, I think, the second most talented running back on this team, but how much time can you give him to prove that he can stay healthy? I mean, after his last injury, I was like, I think they just need to move on. I mean, how long can you keep him on this roster for? With Christian McCaffrey there, Elijah Mitchell's just not going to get enough work to matter for fantasy. He could be good. Like when he gets in, he can average 5 yards a carry and can be really good for the 49ers, but it's not going to be enough to matter for fantasy. Maybe he goes out there and breaks off a long run and has a nice fantasy week, but being able to predict that is going to be absolutely impossible. So I want nothing to do with these backups unless CMC were to go down. Maybe if you have a really big, deep roster, if you're in a league that drafts a lot of players and you take Christian McCaffrey early, maybe you spend one of those last picks on either Jordan Mason or Elijah Mitchell if he were to make the team. But that's all it would be, is just an insurance policy. That's it.
Even if Mitchell makes the team, there's no guarantee he's RB2. I could easily see Jordan Mason passing him on the depth chart.
Elijah Mitchell is much more talented than Jordan Mason, though.
Okay, but if you can't be counted on to stay on the field, why am I going to, put you in a position where we have to depend on you? That's my thing. The Niners have to stop depending on guys that get hurt. They kept carting Jimmy Garoppolo back out there, hoping that this was the year that he stayed healthy. And for the most part, he never did, except for 1 year. And they just kept putting themselves in bad situations. Javon Kinlaw, same thing, right? Hurt guys get hurt. Dee Ford, same thing. You got to stop that. Just assume they are going to get hurt and go with somebody else.
It's so hard, though, because you know how electric Elijah Mitchell is. So if you were to let him go and he goes to another team, like, he's going to have good plays. And it's hard to let a guy go that, if whenever he is healthy for his one quarter, he is going to have some special plays. And then also, you don't want Jordan Mason to be the full-time starting running back. If Christian McCaffrey were to go down, if you still have Elijah Mitchell and he can stay healthy, that's okay, right? He's not even close to CMC, but he can be a good enough force in the backfield to actually make a difference. You really want Jordan Mason back there handling?
Yeah, why not?
I think you just think because that one big run that didn't matter. Like,
he's been good every time he's played. He's been good. Like, it's running back. This is what the Shanahans. That's what the Shanahans do. I'm old enough to remember.
So I need to ask you then. We're going to get off track here for a second, but listening to you and Levin yesterday, you said you would be more worried about Christian McCaffrey's health than a quarterback's health. And then you're also talking about Derrick Henry, the Titans, and stuff like that. You guys are so wrong. You're so wrong. Hey, do we not remember Derrick Henry missing a half of a season and the Titans still being the number 1 seed in the AFC and not mattering because Deonta Foreman came in and was like, could do it, like somehow was productive, like never has been, but he was productive. He wasn't Derrick Henry. No one will be, but the team was fine. They won games. They were the number 1 seed. Derrick Henry stays healthy last year. You know who didn't? Ryan Tannehill. And Malik Willis comes in and that team fell to shambles. I mean, they weren't even a team anymore. They could not do anything. And so the quarterback matters so much more. I mean, you would have much rather lost Christian McCaffrey in the NFC Championship game than Brock Purdy by a gazillion.
But that's dependent on who's behind them, right?
But you always have like most teams don't have a good backup quarterback.
the 49ers, I would argue this year do, right? If Brock, it was different last year. Brock was the third string guy last year. He got hurt. Then it was Josh freaking Johnson. There's a difference this year. If Brock gets hurt, it's the number 3 pick in the draft, we think.
I still think even if Trey Lance were to been on the team last year and healthy and he hasn't played like pretty much the whole year because most backups don't, right? You would much rather your running back go down than having to throw in Trey Lance in that situation. It doesn't matter how good you think you can be. Like, go on to the next running back. You will live. Like, you'll be fine. That's not going to be the nail in the coffin. Losing your starting quarterback is.
Not for this team this year, I don't think. Honestly, look, we saw before Christian McCaffrey got to the 49ers, even with Kittle and Debo and Ayuk and all those people, they were scoring 19 points a game.
But let's say Brock Purdy gets hurt and then we're like, oh, it's fine. We just go to Trey Lance. What if Trey Lance gets hurt? If Christian McCaffrey gets hurt and then you put in Elijah Mitchell, you don't have to be on the edge of your seat like, oh my God, Elijah Mitchell can't get hurt. You'll just move on to the next running back. Who cares? When the quarterbacks, it's like, oh, well, you'll have to move on to Sam Darnold.
Yeah, but now you're projecting 2 quarterback injuries. The question was full health for either.
But you have to assume that there's still a risk for injury at the next quarterback.
Well, yeah, but there's always a risk for injury. But the question we're specifically talking about is starting quarterback or starting running back.
For every single team, it's starting quarterback.
No,
and then you guys were like, oh, definitely the Titans. Derrick Henry matters way more. I mean, we've seen it over the last 2 years. Derrick Henry doesn't matter, even close to even a Ryan Tannehill, who's not a special quarterback in the slightest.
Who's the quarterback behind him?
Malik Willis. But
right.
Why do we know that Trey Lance is any better than Malik Willis?
Well, we don't know for sure.
Exactly.
I would still much rather take my chances with Trey Lance than I would.
Malik Willis had a ton of hype. Everyone thought he was going to be fun.
Yeah, Malik Willis wasn't the 3rd overall pick in the draft, was he? It's a slight difference there.
Well, Sam Darnold was the 3rd overall pick in the draft, and you don't want to see him.
Right. They're not all great, but I'm saying the chances of Trey Lance being better than Malik Willis, I think, are pretty good. Like, damn. Let's Malik Willis is terrible. Come on.
And I'm a Trey Lance supporter. The quarterback matters more than the running back. That's all I'm saying.
Would Mason be the deep bench stash?
I think if Elijah Mitchell makes this team, it's Mitchell.
Yeah, if he makes the team, he'll.
We don't even know if Jordan Mason will get snaps over Ty Davis-Price.
Oh, yeah, he will. He did last year all the time because he played on special teams.
Okay, well, Shanahan changes his running backs all the time.
Well, they have been different leading rusher every year, the Shanahan regime. Nick Eller, YouTube channel member. Shout out to all our YouTube channel members, by the way. Please feel free to sign up for that. Less than $3 a month. Nick says, my favorite, Mimosa Michelle. Huge well wishes for your wife. Hard times will only make you stronger.
Yes. My wife got laid off, if anyone's wondering. But we're getting through it, and she's going to find a job.
I've been there.
Yes, you have. It'll be fine. She's very talented. She'll land on her feet.
Yes, she is, and she will. Nick Ellert says, if Mason became number 1, would Ty Davis-Price be the touchdown vulture?
Ugh, I don't know. This is just all terrible situations, guys. Let's just hope Christian McCaffrey stays healthy. Let's hope Elijah Mitchell can make this team and stay healthy. And we don't have to, if we're worrying about Jordan Mason and Ty Davis-Price in fantasy, things have gone wrong for the 49ers. Things have gone wrong for fantasy. And if you drafted Christian McCaffrey at the 101 and he gets hurt and misses a lot of time, your team is probably hurting, right? Like it's not going to help you that you have Jordan Mason on your bench all too much. He's not going to put up even a half of what CMC does.
Well, yes. I think the drop off between CMC and other guys, just the versatility of what he allows you to do. If you put Elijah Mitchell in the slot, every defensive coordinator is going to be like, great, that's a win for me. But when you put Christian McCaffrey in the slot, it's like, oh, crap, now we got to worry about this. That's the difference. That's why he's so valuable to this team. And they love to mess with defensive coordinators. They'll start out with McCaffrey in the backfield. Then they'll motion him into the slot. They'll put Debo in the backfield. Then they'll have somebody else come in motion from the opposite side of the formation. Every time they do that, it changes all the assignments from what the defenders have to do. That's what the Niners do. They mess with your head before the play even starts. And they can do that so much more with Christian McCaffrey. That's why I feel like he's so important to the team.
I was literally shocked. I know how good Christian McCaffrey is, and I know how good of a receiver he is. When I was doing his projections to look at his average yards per reception in his career, he is always over 8.5, 8.5, 8.7, 9.0. that is a wide receiver in the slot. I mean, that would be low for a wide receiver, but a lot of slot wide receivers don't average too much. Like Cooper Kupp last year averaged 10.8 yards per reception, and CMC's at like 9 yards per reception. Juju consistently averages only like 9 yards per reception. I mean, that's a big knock on him. Deontay Johnson is not even a slot, but with the Steelers never passing the ball down the field, averages like 10 yards per reception. And you're telling me a running back is averaging nearly 9 yards per reception? That is a cheat code. That is incredible. Like I just was like literally blown away when I saw that. I'm like, that doesn't happen. Really good running backs, really, really good running back seasons, not even running back careers. Running back seasons are like 8 yards per reception, while Christian McCaffrey's nearly at 9 yards per reception in his career. That's absurd.
And you still don't think he'll be RB1 for you? You still putting Bijan over him?
I don't know. I keep going back and forth. I will probably, I think my heart wants to go Bijan. My head is telling me you should go Christian McCaffrey. I am extremely worried about the travel for the 49ers and Christian McCaffrey's health. That is a big concern of mine.
They travel the second most miles of any team in the league this year, which of course, I think Seattle is number one. And they are not going to do the East Coast stay over thing, both because the schedule doesn't really allow it, and apparently the players started complaining about it. So that is not a thing that's going to happen. So yeah, they're going to have some trips this year that they didn't really have to deal with last year. Remember, last year they didn't leave the Pacific time zone, I think, after week 11. They went to Mexico City to play the Cardinals. I could be wrong on the week, but I know they played the Cardinals in Mexico City, and then they didn't leave the Pacific time zone after that. That is not how it's going to be this year.
Yeah, I know he stayed relatively healthy last year, just some bangs and bruises, but those 2 years prior are still scary. I mean, they're still in your mind because when you're spending that high of a draft pick, you need to know he's going to last and be available. And the travel scares me. So I kind of lean Bijan that way. He just seems more durable, but any running back can get hurt. Yep. And a guy I absolutely love, spoiler alert for the running back show, Tony Pollard. I'm going to have him stupid high. I love him, and he's coming off that, what was it, a leg fracture. So
it was kind of a gnarly injury against the 49ers in that playoff game. I love Tony Pollard. I want him to get healthy because I want him to get paid, and he deserves to get paid. It is funny that I'm seeing rumblings that like the Cowboys might bring Ezekiel Elliott back. He's got to be like, damn it, I can't
just let him go. Zeke, go away. Go to any other team.
All right, let's go to wide receivers now. And this is really, I think there's a lot to dive into here. You've got Ayuk, you've got Debo. Debo's on the record as saying his 2022 season was awful, horrible. And it was. Ayuk had a great 2022 season, and he's been like the story of minicamp is Brandon Ayuk looks amazing, really, really good. How do you rank the 49ers wide receivers fantasy-wise?
So this was hard because they have now 4 receivers that deserve a lot of targets with Debo, Ayuk, Kittle, and CMC. There's not enough to go around. And as I stated, with Brock Purdy last year, they did not throw the ball very often. They're on pace for 477 pass attempts on the season, 17-game pace for the 5 games that Purdy started in the regular season. I don't think their defense is going to be as dominant as they were last year.
How dare you?
I think they'll be good, but so I do expect the pass attempts to be up a little bit, but they're not going to throw for much more than 500 pass attempts. So it's really hard to get these guys all their targets they deserve. CMC is going to get his targets. 90, I have him at 90, and that's low for him in his career. He's normally above 100, 120 when he stays healthy. So I actually have that low for him. I have Kittle at 100 targets. That doesn't leave a ton of targets to go to both Debo and Brandon Ayuk. So I have Ayuk sitting at 115 targets. That's not enough to be a great fantasy asset. It's enough to be a okay wide receiver 2, where you can plug him in and he's going to have some good games. I have him at 1,084 yards, 7 touchdowns. I think what can drastically change his season is if he ended up getting over the double-digit touchdowns. That could happen, but I have him at 7. I feel comfortable there. And that gives him 233 PPR points. That actually would have made him the wide receiver 14 last year overall. It's actually just one spot ahead of where he finished. He finished as a wide receiver 15 last year, scored 228 points. So I have him with a pretty similar season. He did have a very nice, time with Brock Purdy as the starter. He got 22.7% of the team's targets. His average yards per reception went way up with him. Actually, everyone's did, but Ayuk was sitting at 14.4 yards per reception with Purdy, which is really nice. But Debo missed a chunk of those games. So it's hard to give him too many more targets. Like I can't add targets. If anything, you have to subtract them. I don't think there's enough to go around for these wide receivers to be great for fantasy.
What is your philosophy when it comes to guys in contract years in fantasy? Because I think there's a belief with the 49ers that, look, Ayuk is, he's really busting his ass this year because it's a contract year and he wants to get paid.
It doesn't have to do with talent, though. Like my projection has nothing to do with talent for Ayuk. I have him being very efficient. Like I have him having an efficient year, averaging 14.5 yards per reception, 65 catch percentage, scoring 7 times. Like it's not about talent for Brandon Ayuk. If he was on, I don't know, Houston, like playing with CJ Stroud, even like not even a good quarterback, I would have his targets way, way, way up. It's like he would need to be on a team that could actually provide targets for him. But when you're possibly the fourth option for a target in any single game, not for the season, but in any single game, you could have the fourth fewest targets on your team. It's really hard to project him to be a very good fantasy wide receiver. I think he will have nice games. I think he's going to be inconsistent. And I think Debo and him will both kind of go back and forth with who gets more targets that game, who breaks off the touchdown, who gets the targets in the red zone. Are they going short that game or a little bit more intermediate? Like it's all going to change. And I don't want any piece of Brandon Ayuk or really Debo Samuel this year. I have Debo projected for pretty similar to Ayuk, just a little bit under 10 fewer points. I am at 965 receiving yards, 4 receiving touchdowns, 3 rushing touchdowns, 192 rushing yards.
Let me just say, if he has 4 receiving touchdowns, that's a huge disappointment. That is a massive.
He doesn't score receiving touchdowns.
They have to change his usage, and you've talked about this a lot. They need to get him the ball deeper down the field. You're paying him to be an elite wide receiver, an elite player, yes, because they are paying him apart for what he does on the ground, but he's got to give you more. Last year, he had 2 receiving touchdowns in 13 games, just over 600 yards. Like, that is not going to cut it. You have to get more out of it. It's the same thing I talked about with George Kittle, complaining about George Kittle. When you pay guys elite money, you have to get elite production out of them to justify it. The teams are set up to where you need the guys that you pay the most to produce the most. Kittle wasn't up until Brock took over last year, and then he actually was. Debo was not last year at any point, so he better step it up. 4 receiving touchdowns is a disaster for Debo Samuel in 2023 if it happens.
It's not great, but it's hard to project him for more, right? How much more could you give him? 6?
The problem is he's not great in the red zone because he's not a great route runner. Ayuk is the best receiving threat in the red zone because he's a fantastic route runner. So whatever coverage, zone, man, whatever in the red zone, he can get open. You can go on Twitter right now and search for Ayuk video, and you'll just see clips of him roasting people. But that's not what Debo is. When Debo gets red zone touchdowns, it's usually rushing touchdowns in the red zone or like a screen pass where he just trucks 3 dudes and scores.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's going to change. So that's what makes it difficult with Debo, because the majority of touchdowns are scored inside the red zone, and that's not where he excels as a receiver.
This is how I picture the 49ers to operate when they get towards the goal line. It's going to be, let's get Christian McCaffrey in rushing, right? That's the first one. If it's really close, maybe, just do a quarterback sneak with Purdy, or let's get the ball to Kittle because he's that big freaking dude. And he, apparently Purdy and him have that connection. Although a lot of the touchdowns were deep for Kittle. So a little bit different. Or Brandon Ayuk, like he's a really good route runner. Like you said, he can get open. That then makes Debo Samuel the 5th option. And maybe it's rushing, maybe it's receiving, but I have him with 3 rushing touchdowns. So I have him scoring 7 times. I think even his rushing would be ahead of getting him a target around the goal line. Like I think Kyle Shanahan would say, all right, next option, run the ball with Debo. And then maybe after that would be get Debo a target.
I agree. Jeremy Watson says, sad to say Debo would be a pickup for fantasy if the 49ers injury to McCaffrey or Kittle. Yeah, that would change it a little. But I agree with your kind of hierarchy there. McCaffrey is definitely option number one in the red zone. It's the safest thing. And we know Kyle Shanahan loves safe. Just hand it to Christian and hope he gets in. That's basically.
Or passing the McCaffrey. I didn't even say that. And that's definitely ahead of Debo as well. Sorry.
And those would generally be safer passes too in the flat or just close to the line of scrimmage. That's the hierarchy there. Debo is not high on that hierarchy. I also agree with Kenny. Dear God, don't sneak with Purdy. I've seen enough of that. Not a skill the kid has. He's 1,000% right. Brock stinks at it. He's not good at it. And we're especially spoiled because Jimmy Garoppolo was excellent at it. Brock is bad. He gets too vertical. He stands up. Christian McCaffrey has to shove him in all the time.
You did get 2 last year. Gotta give him that.
2 rushing touchdowns?
Yeah.
Yeah, but one wasn't a sneak. It was just a scramble where he went up the middle. And the other one was Christian McCaffrey picking him up and shoving him forward. He's not
good. He'd be good because he's like a little I don't know.
Yeah, like a little twitchy guy.
Yeah, you think he'd be good.
He's not.
He's small, though. He's small.
Let's see. Nick says that's the flip side. Kyle will call a red zone play for Debo over Ayuk. Christian McCaffrey, Kittle, Debo, red zone targets. I don't think he'll call a red zone play. He'll call a run for Debo over a pass to Ayuk. I would agree with that because if Kyle had his way, he would never throw inside the red zone. He just doesn't like to. I know that there's no fantasy value for anybody beyond that wide receiver wise for the 49ers because if you have to play Ray McLeod on your team, your fantasy season has gone off the rails.
And sadly, I don't think there's any room for like Danny Gray. Well, obviously not for fantasy, but is there room for Danny Gray to become something this year, to actually break out, or were both of their 3rd round picks last year just completely useless?
Kyle is brutal on wide receivers specifically because he played wide receiver in college. So he thinks he knows all about it. And he has a very specific picture of what you're supposed to do at that position. And especially as rookies, most rookies do not understand how much blocking they're going to have to do and all the different things they're going to have to learn. So it's hard. So it's possible that Danny Gray could have a much better year this year. But I could easily see Danny Gray having like 16 catches this year, literally. Now, maybe they're, for like 18 yards a catch because all he does is just go deep. But that could be, and there's value in that from a team perspective, not from a fantasy perspective, obviously. But I think that if Danny Gray does anything, it's going to be something like that.
What's hilarious is that I have Danny Gray at 10 targets for 18 yards per reception. So because like you just said, the 18
there
yards.
There you go.
Oh, we both have it. I do think he can get more than 10 targets. It's just there wasn't enough to go around to all these players. Juwan Jennings is going to get his handful of targets. Like whatever reason, they're going to get him involved. So
I don't understand why you hate on Juwan Jennings so much. Nobody is saying he's like a stud wide receiver. All he does is catch passes on 3rd down and make first downs. What is so terrible about that?
He's fine.
66% of his catches went for first downs last year. That's again, you just poo-poo that like it's nothing.
I mean, most wide receivers catches go. I mean, like I said, bad wide receivers average 10 yards per reception. So that's the first down. And that's bad wide receivers.
This is his role. That's all he does is on 3rd down. That's all they want him to do. Doesn't matter if it's 3rd and 5, get 6. If it's 3rd and 4, get 5. That's all. They don't care if it's 10 yards per catch. Just keep the damn chains moving, Juwan. We love you. It's probably his last year in San Francisco. Will you leave the poor guy alone?
He's a very solid 5th option for any team.
Yes. And I think that if the Niners had their druthers, let's say, Ronnie Bell will be the Juwan Jennings in the future because Jennings is going to be a free agent after the year. They'll let him go. They're not going to compete with anybody for his services. And we'll see if Ronnie Bell can take that spot. Next up, I
think Danny Gray would be a little bit more like exciting though, as the 4th wide receiver on the field instead of Juwan. Maybe not as safe, but having that deep threat, that speed, don't you think that would be a little bit better?
Well, you're trying to do 2 different things. With Danny Gray on the field, you want to stretch the defense, take the top off, force the safeties to have to honor that deep play. You're not doing any of that with Juwan Jennings because he's not fast. He was a 7th round draft pick for a reason. All you're doing with him is finding a way to get him open on 3rd down, and he's particularly good after the catch as well. He can break some tackles. So your goals are just, they're two totally different things. It's what you want on the field with them. So I think that's why I think Danny Gray is like, he's mostly on the field to run, not really to catch. If that makes
Hopefully he sees the field more often. I mean, there was a reason they took him, and I think it was for speed. And then they just take these third rounders and they're like, we don't care. We're just throwing them in the garbage because that's what we do with our third round picks.
It is frustrating for sure. Now let's get to the tight ends. This is a more fun position than in years past because the Niners drafted a couple of guys and they have gotten virtually nothing out of their backup tight ends. The backup tight ends have combined for 16 catches over the past 2 seasons. So it has basically been Kittle and a pile of nothing. What do you make of Kittle for next year? Because he started scoring like a madman down the stretch last year. Do you think that continues, or do you think that was kind of just like a hot streak, essentially?
He should have always been a great scorer. This is what we talked about last offseason. And I did project that Kittle would have his best receiving touchdown year, but it was for many different reasons. Because I said because Trey Lance would open that up for him and it would be so hard to defend. And that didn't end up happening because Trey Lance didn't play. But he did score his career high 11 receiving touchdowns. 7 of them came with Purdy, right?
Yep.
Yeah, pretty insane. So I have him projected for 10 again. I think it's hard to project anyone for more than 10 receiving touchdowns. 10 is a really good year. And then I have him with 100 targets, 70 receptions, 910 receiving yards. A very, very good tight end season. That would have put him at tight end 2 this past year if he would have scored those same points. He ended as a tight end 3 last season. So I have him, having a better year than he did last year, but not by too much. And the biggest thing with Kittle is we need him to be more consistent. And with Brock Purdy, he was a consistent fantasy scorer because the touchdowns. However, the receiving yards and receptions were not consistent. He still, even with this projection, a really nice projection of 910 yards and 10 touchdowns, it still would have been 100 fewer points than Travis Kelce scored last year. 100 fewer fantasy points. Like, no one's touching Travis Kelce. So obviously Kelce's the 101 of tight ends. But I also, when all things are done, I do think I probably would still even have TJ Hawkinson and Mark Andrews ranked over George Kittle. They both, like, Hawkinson was so good for the Vikings last year. I do think he's probably the second target on this team this season. And then Mark Andrews with Lamar Jackson is just amazing as well. George Kittle's too inconsistent for me, but you can't rank him further than tight end 4. Like, he'll be tight end 4 at the worst.
The yardage that's the problem I feel like with all these 49ers players is because Kyle Shanahan just changes the game plan every single week. You never know who's going to be the guy that week. Like Justin Jefferson, the Vikings have to chuck Justin Jefferson the ball if they're going to do anything. Yeah. So that's why he puts up numbers every week. With the 49ers, Debo and Ayuk could do nothing. It could be Kittle and McCaffrey one week, or maybe it's Ayuk and Kittle, or whatever combination you want to have. You're never going to have as consistent a production with them than you will with some other teams. And yeah, Kittle he has too many games where it's 5 catches, 28 yards, 4 catches, 20. That kills you.
Well, and that's Lav and I talked about this last week where George Kittle was like, I really came along in the second half of the season. It's like in touchdowns, but the second half of the season, if you're just looking from week 12 on, you took it off. I was looking at your stats, but a lot of 20-yard games in there. It's like, that's not coming along. Week 12, 26 yards, then the next week, 22, then the next week, 28. Did have really 2 good weeks, 93 and 120, but then 23 and 29. So maybe he means coming along with touchdowns, but he still was not a heavy part of this offense in the slightest.
The Kittle factor that I feel like, I hope the Niners had their eyes open to it last year, the explosiveness. Mm-hmm. He had 5 touchdowns.
Get him the ball in space. No one's tackling him. Like, no one is tackling him if he has movement, if he has space to move and like get his run game on. No one's tackling that man unless you have 3 guys there to all take him down. He's not going down. So they need to be like the way they used him with Brock Purdy. I loved it. And as long as he keeps scoring touchdowns, if he scores 10 touchdowns, he's going to be a really good fantasy tight end. The receptions, like in PPR leagues, it's going to be a little bit harder to rank him over a TJ Hawkinson or a Mark Andrews just because they feel a little bit safer with their receptions. Obviously, Kelsey's number 1 no matter what. But in like if you're in a half PPR or standard, I do think his touchdowns will still be there. I think they learned something last year, and I think Brock Purdy looks for George Kittle, and like I said, get him the ball in space. He's scoring. No one's tackling this man.
I hope that we better see that double screen play again to Kittle at some point next year. The one they ran against Seattle, that was so freaking great. As soon as you saw Brock let it go, I was like, "Oh my God, there's nobody there." Like, there's just not going to be anybody.
You just figured there had to be a penalty. Like someone did something wrong.
It was absurdly good, but it was so damn exciting to see finally that potential that I've talked about forever. What do I always say with Kittle? Blocking is the second best thing he does. And hopefully they keep that going. He's a unicorn at the position. I know Kelsey is good, but Kittle is a little different. Kittle can break tackles after the catch. Travis Kelce had 2 touchdowns of 30 yards or more last year. Kittle had 5, tied for the 3rd most in the entire league, and he was most by a tight end.
I mean, he's absolutely. I was listening to you. I know you think I wasn't.
I don't know. Were you?
I was slightly listening to you, but I agree with you that he is absurdly electric because any tight end having those type of huge plays, but I think it comes down more to like he just won't go down, right? Like that's why he's able to get all those yards. Now he was targeted more down the field with Brock Purdy, but it's not like they were super long passes. It's just like if he gets like that, I don't know how to explain it. If he gets that ball like on a slant and he's running like a slant, like if he's running sideways instead of forward, you're like, no one's stopping this man. I don't know. Like I'm trying to make the hand gestures right now, but that's one of my favorite plays whenever watching football and I see George Kittle running with that ball and he's going like, I'm like, okay, he's gone. He's gone. He's done.
When there's one dude in the way, you're like, that's not happening.
Yeah.
And I hope it continues. I really, really do. And that's what it's really going to come down to for the 49ers, because like you said, the volume with the passing game is not going to be there. It's what do Ayuk and Debo and Kittle do with the opportunities that they do get. And that can be really scary in fantasy because, you got to roll 7s. Those dice got to come up 7 a lot of times for you to cash in and get the points. And generally the more you have to hit that bet, the more likely you are to lose. But the potential is there, but you got to be willing. You got to be comfortable with risk to take a lot of 49ers on your team.
So when we really just like the overview of the 49ers fantasy team, it's so hard. It's really hard to project because they have too many weapons. Too many receiving weapons. And Christian McCaffrey feels like home run hitter. He's the focal point of this offense. He's going to be great for fantasy. The other guys, I do think will be highly inconsistent, especially Debo and Ayuk and Kittle. With the tight end position being what it is, there's not very many good tight ends out there for fantasy. And almost all of them are highly inconsistent as it is. So you're happy with George Kittle because he can give you those huge games that a lot of tight ends cannot. So yeah. You're willing to take those down games because he can put up a 30-point fantasy game, which there's like 3 tight ends out there that could do that. Like there's not many. So you're able to take George Kittle because of that super high potential. But I do think he's going to be, as always, like you're going to have to be patient with him because there's going to be some games it's just not great. So it really comes down to CMC, Kittle, and I don't want anything to do with Ayuk or Debo unless they fall really far in my drafts. And I think Ayuk at that point or Debo even become a nice value, which they could fall to a nice spot because I don't think they're going to be drafted around wide receiver 15. And I think that's where both of them could land around. So they could be a really nice value. It's just like I'm not dying to get them and I'm not reaching to get them.
The frustrating thing with Debo is like we've seen it with him. We've seen him as a wide receiver look really, really good. In 2021, he had 1,400 yards on less than 80 catches. That has rarely been done in the history of the league. That year he started 189-1 against Detroit, 93 in week 2, 52 and this is just receiving yards. 52 receiving yards in week 3, 156 and 2 touchdowns, then 58, then 100 and a touchdown, 171 the week after that. Like he was incredible. Like how can you see that from him and then be like, where is that the rest of the time? Where did it go?
It's very frustrating. And it's Kyle Shanahan just I don't know. Like, I know he's so smart and I know he's a offensive genius, but he used Debo highly incorrectly last year. I think he just got obsessed with the way they were using him at the end of the last season. He was like this weapon for the team, and he was just like obsessed with using him as a weapon instead of a wide receiver. And it really hurt Debo, I think, as a NFL player and especially fantasy. And hopefully he gets back to being like, well, I have my weapon in Christian McCaffrey. I don't need to have Debo be that all the time. Use him as a real wide receiver. I'm not saying he's going to have, you know, 12 air yards per target or anything like that. Like, I know it's going to be low, but at least get him more than a running back gets. Like, he was averaging basically what a running back gets in air yards per target last year. That has to increase massively.
And I hope it does, because he can be really good. I'm just checking right now because Rich Madrid tweeted out a great stat. Last year, Debo Samuel had 27 catches behind the line of scrimmage. That was almost half of his receptions for the entire season. It was 48% of Debo's catches last year came behind the line of scrimmage. That is not the best way to use him. It's got to stop, Kyle. You can do better than that.
Yeah, I mean, just throw it. It was all the time. It was just target behind the line. Do your drop. Do like make a miracle. There's 3 guys coming for you.
Right.
Make a miracle. It's like and they know that's what's happening. Like, defenses at this point, they know. Like, Debo's just gonna sit back there, get this. Like, that's not successful.
Hopefully it does stop. You've had a whole off season to draw it up.
Also, like we were talking about with Brock Purdy, how this team scored so many points with Brock Purdy and CMC. Debo missed a good chunk of those games because of injury. It's like almost the offense was better, not because Debo Samuel was gone, but because Kyle Shanahan wasn't using a player in that way. That was just wasteful plays.
It's true. So Debo was there for Purdy's first start. He had 4 catches for 43 yards. Then he missed the next 3 games. He missed the Seattle game, the Washington game, and the Raider game. And then Debo came back for the final week of the regular season against Arizona. He only had 2 catches.
Like 2 of those games, he only played 50% because he got hurt in the one and he missed 50% of the game and didn't play him the full time when he, So in the game he got hurt, he only played 43% of the snaps. So it was really, that was the first game Purdy started, was week 14, and he only played 43% of snaps, missed the next 3 games, and then played 68% of the snaps when he came back, only 2 receptions for 20, but like that was his first game back from injury. So basically he played a few quarters with Purdy in the regular season. And then of course they had their time together in the playoffs, and he did have a great game against the Seahawks, but we don't really know about these two a whole ton yet, and how Kyle Shanahan will use Debo with Purdy under center.
And that's half the battle when you're talking about fantasy and projections and all that stuff. So we will see. God, I hope if you could get peak Ayuk, peak Kittle, or peak Debo in 2023, what would you want?
Peak Debo.
Peak Debo. You would want him even more than Kittle. Yeah.
I mean, Kittle's Kittle. He's already at peak. It's just about his usage. That's it. And I think like Ayuk is it all comes down to usage. Again, with Debo, the way he performed in 2021 and just overtook game. Like there was games where it looked like they were going to lose, and then he would just break off this insane play, and you're like, what is happening? And he brings his team back, and those plays change a game so drastically. That what Debo can do, that if you get peak Debo again, I think that's the biggest difference maker.
Nick Ellert is asking for Debo's playoff stats.
He had a great game in the wild card game, and then
6 for 133 and a touchdown.
Yeah, I mean, amazing.
But then he went for 4 for 45 in the game against the Cowboys, and then he went for 3 for 33 in the game against the Eagles, which you kind of throw out because there was no quarterback in that game.
Yeah, you see that 6 rush attempts for -9 yards. Did you mute yourself?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
Not good. They should play a sound when you mute yourself in your headphones so you know that you're muted, because I can still hear myself in my headphones. So I'm like, oh, I'm good. idiot. I do that once a show.
I will say Debo had a long reception of 74 yards in that wild card game.
Right.
Cool. But still, we don't know how Kyle will use him with Brock. Just because he had that one game of 133 where one of the receptions 74 yards. And I for some reason I just can't remember. Was it a long throw? I'm trying to look right now.
No, it was a very short throw.
Okay, so it was one that he just broke off, and it was in the fourth quarter. I don't think that really tells us anything.
I have seen, it's so funny that you say that. Like, I have watched all these games so many times. I can see the play in my head. It was Brock rolling out to the left. Debo came across the field to the right, caught it. And that's the play where Ayuk blocked his guy for like 5 seconds. And Debo just turned on the afterburners and went down the left sideline for the touchdown.
Yeah, I don't remember that in the slightest, but
that was so, it's
66 yards after the catch. So again, it was the same usage where he was getting short air yards. It was, so yeah, that's great. He broke one off. I mean, and that's what we're used to Debo doing, but I don't think that's, with Brock Purdy, he's getting targeted deeper. No, he wasn't. He just happened to break off this touchdown.
And that'd be a nice little wrinkle. You know, we always talk about every year. One year it was Debo as a running back. That was the wrinkle. Last year it was Christian McCaffrey. That was Kyle's wrinkle. Maybe this year it'll be using Debo deeper down the field as an actual wide receiver. How about that? Let's try that, Kyle.
I would love to see a wide receiver be a deep threat in this offense. Let's see some, but also we don't know how far Brock Purdy can throw with this elbow. If it was Trey Lance, I could see them trying to, get a speedster more involved, like a Danny Gray, and throwing deep to him.
I think that was the plan. I really think that was their plan. Trey's going to take over. We're going to run more stuff inside. That's why they drafted a couple of bigger bodied players, and Aaron Banks did not fit the traditional Shanahan profile. I think they were like, we're going to go Trey. We're going to run power up the middle, and we're going to chuck it deep. And that's going to be our new thing this year to keep offenses off balance. And then, of course, didn't happen for a variety of reasons.
Yeah, that was unfortunate.
That
would have been a fun offense, but they were, I really much enjoyed watching the 49ers with Brock Purdy. I need to remember that.
Go watch it again. I watch it like every other week. I'm so desperate for football. I just rewatch old stuff.
I can't rewatch games. I could what happened.
That's all right. I watch for different stuff. I was watching 2019 games the other day, watching their defense, and my God, if the plan for the 49ers on defense really quickly is to get back to 2019. And if they do, holy hell. I think we forget how insane they were. You had DeForest Buckner up the middle, pressuring quarterbacks, and then there was nowhere for them to go because it was Dee Ford and Bosa on the outside, just literally converging on the quarterback at the same time. That's what they want to get back to.
Imagine if you just paid DeForest Buckner what you paid Javon Hargrave.
Okay. But they got Hargrave.
And then they could have used that 13th overall pick on, Tristan Wirfs.
I hate when people do that, though, with the draft. They always go back and assume, well, if you use this pick on this guy.
Well, that's who Tampa Bay ended up taking. Or no.
Yeah, it was Tampa Bay.
Yeah.
They always pick the studs. They do that like, if they didn't trade
that's who they end up taking. I'm not picking a stud. That's the pick. That was the pick.
That was who the Bucks picked. But who says the 49ers would have picked that? We don't know. They could have picked Tristan Wirfs. They chose not to. I don't like when people do that. Well, if they didn't trade the picks for Trey Lance, they could have had Micah Parsons. Yeah, maybe. Or they could have had a scrub in the first round. I've seen this team pick.
What draft was this? 2020 or 2019?
Which draft? The Tristan Wirfs draft? I think that was the COVID year. Yeah.
Okay, because the 49ers ended up taking Javon Kinlaw.
And Ayuk. They got both that year, I believe, right?
Yeah.
Because Kyle, I remember the reaction from Kyle was like super excited after they.
Imagine they just took CeeDee Lamb instead of Javon Kinlaw or Justin Jefferson. I guess should be my thing. But Justin Jefferson wasn't expected to be this. What'd you say?
I think Ayuk is just as good as CeeDee Lamb. I think the only reason we don't think that about Ayuk is because he just doesn't have he doesn't play in the same offense. He doesn't have the opportunity.
Yeah, if you put Ayuk with the Cowboys as a wide receiver one and put CeeDee Lamb, I agree with you that it would be different for both. I do think CeeDee Lamb is extremely talented though, but I also think Ayuk is extremely talented. But you can agree that Justin Jefferson is above.
Oh God, yeah. I mean, clearly.
Imagine being Philly and taking Jalen Reagor over Justin Jefferson.
Justin Jefferson he's on the Jerry Rice track. Like, Niner fans don't like to admit that anybody's on the Jerry Rice track, Justin, he's on his way, man. He's freaking unbelievable. We'll see how that turns out. I do like him.
Nick just made a good point. I got that mixed up. Nick said if they signed Buckner, they wouldn't have pick 14. I don't know why I was thinking. I got that mixed up in my head. You're correct. But it turns out it didn't matter because Javon Kinlaw is as good as not having pick 14.
Yeah. This is the year, though. He's going to stay healthy. Sure. All right. That's going to do it for this edition of the show. Again, rate, review, follow the Gold Standard Network. Smash the like and subscribe buttons for the YouTube channel, please. We go live almost every single day at this point, so you always want to get notified when we do that. Please, 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 and thank you. And if, like we say, if you leave a review, we will read it on the show. You've already had your mimosa today, Michelle. What's the rest of your weekend look like?
I got to go grocery shopping after mimosa.
I don't know. That could be a dangerous situation.
It'll be fun.
All right, everybody. Thank you, and we'll talk to you next week.